Today is a pretty big day in the life of Customerland Podcast because we're talking about a project that the three of us on this conversation have been working on for several months. It's called the SheShops Report. By way of introduction, Ingrid Sierra is CMO at FinFare Connect. But before she took that big job, she and I were kind of locked head together in producing this project, along with Mary Mathis, who is
Director of Data Insights.
Thank you, at Alpha Diver, who was one of the primary contributors to the report. So first of all, thank you both for this conversation and your efforts on behalf of the report. And perhaps you can do a better job of describing yourselves than I just did. Butcher your title, Mary, but what do you do at Alpha Diver, and then what does Alpha Diver do in the marketplace?
Sure. I am our Director of Data Insights, as we mentioned, and really what that means is I am kind of the primary interface between the academic side of our team, which are folks that came to us from academia who have PhDs in neuroscience and really built the models and the theories and the implicit measures and exercises that really underpin everything that we do, and the building the database that we have of these lenses of human behavior that I'll talk about in a moment. And then I'm kind of the translator of what they find into a client-facing story, into actionable insights for our partners of what does this tell us, and how can we really activate against this information in meaningful ways. And
gotcha. And also, just a point of note that Mary was, I guess, point person, for lack of a better word, on all of the work that we did together putting this together. So there's that. And Ingrid, perhaps you can do a better job than I did on describing who you are, sure, and what FinFare is all about.
Yeah, so as you said, I now work for FinFare. We're a startup based in Southern California, and I'm basically building the marketing function there, which is super exciting. But as you said as well, before that, and still a little bit now, we've been working together on the customer more on a kind of strategic advisory point of view, and that's as part of that work that the SheShops reports came about, and I'm super excited about it because we were obviously at the customer. Everything is about like those insights and being a little bit like ahead of trends and thinking through behaviors and stuff. And we, as a lot of things with female overall, like when you look at, I don't know, research on health and impact of medicine and research on the human body, the female body, etc. The woman cohort is always a little bit behind the male cohort in a lot of things in the world. And it's actually the same with insights and those type of analytics. Also, as we'll unpick, women are growing in importance cohort of shoppers. So it was super exciting to unpick all of that. And I mean, Mary will have a lot to say about it, but really getting to a point where we break things down beyond the kind of now very stale life stage demographic that is not real anymore. Because I'm a 46 years old woman. I'm not married. I don't have kids. So clearly, if you keep looking at life stages, you could be completely wrong in what you tell me. And by going more from a psychological phase in life and underpinning that is absolutely fascinating. So, and that's really one of the key things the report is getting out. So sorry, that was a little bit long.
No, that's good. That's good. I think, and it's a good segue into why we decided to put this whole thing together in the first place, because, little disclaimer here, I'm a guy, and, trying to answer the millennial old question of understanding women is a bit of a challenge for my gender, but for marketers, as you were saying, there has almost been a resistance, if you will, to examining that cohort in a way that is different from the way they look at men. And clearly we are different in so many ways. And I remember the early conversations Ingrid and I had on this, which were based on I think a couple of statistics flew across our desk, and we thought, wow, this is really unusual how the female contingent isn't really even acknowledged here, and yet the purchasing power, the economic control you have, is massive. So why aren't people looking at this like a little bit more specifically through a female lens? Was my understanding. But when we brought this whole idea to our research partners, Mary seemed to be very on board very quickly. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but perhaps from an Alpha Diver standpoint, why did you guys decide to join the effort?
I think for us, we've been, in the last couple of years in particular, we've really been taking a growing interest in this growing database that we have of where, we've been measuring these drivers and barriers of consumer behavior for really going back to 2018. So we've got this really nice, rich, robust data set now, and the ability to look at trends over time, to look at a cohort of, okay, women across, from 18 up to 75, we have, all of this data. And I mean, not for every project, but where we're pulsing the population often enough at that gen pop level where we can really start to say, like, what do we see going on? What is driving behavior at that broader level, and looking at the different ways we can slice and dice it into different groups of interests, women versus men, the traditional definitions of the generations versus looking at it a little bit more granularly and saying, like, what I think was really cool about what we were able to do here is, and as we'll get into when we start talking about these groups that we found, we didn't just rely on the traditional generational groupings. We let the data show us these are the age breaks at which there is a meaningful change in the psychology of the shopper, and these ages kind of go together, and there's a common driver that comes to the fore for them, and then in this age group it switches to something else, and then here it switches again, and it doesn't totally cleanly follow what we typically think of as generations. And being able to really look at that in a more meaningful way and derive more informed insights, so that as Ingrid was saying, it's not just about making these assumptions about life stage and assuming that everybody in that cohort is doing the same thing, but looking for these broader trends, and looking at how these things have been changing over time, really the last 5 years or so, noticing trends, kind of these macro forces, what drives and hinders behavior. And what's nice about the way that we do this is we've been measuring it at what we call your daily life level. Is like, how are you going about your day? And we have this rich data set now, and then we dig into it in our context of interest for the given project or client. So that's that frame is going to shift around, but we have this really robust data set now of, as they go about their daily life as people, what are people like at different ages and stages, different ethnicities across the genders, and really starting to build this nice data set that lets us, it's almost like a little bit more anthropological study of like what is going on in the US.
Right.
Aside, and looking at it absent any one particular client's objective or goal. Obviously, like, we can really help to inform that as well, but just for me, like, it was particularly, I just thought it was interesting. It's like, what else can we do with this data? Like, what are some of these things that we can just find as broader truths and bring forth? And I hope that this will be an ongoing partnership where we continue to pull out new findings about female consumers, for example, and then like what other topics could we get into? Maybe do we start to look at different ethnic cohorts, or these different age groups, younger shoppers, older shoppers, et cetera. I think there's a lot of rich insight that we can continue to pull, and we're just getting started with this.
Completely. And it's so fascinating because when you take that kind of step back and that lens that you described with like that more kind of psychological view, when I look at those different phases, and yes, it's linked to age, but it's not linked to where you are in your life, more what's happening in like your way of thinking, etc. Everyone, regardless if I look at my kind of sample of data from everyone I know everywhere, wherever you are into your personal journey, that kind of change of way of thinking happens because of the experience you actually accumulate in your life. Later in life for women, it's that kind of like re-accessed freedom post certain things. And it's almost like, in a funny way, linked to like stages with like how the female body works as well. And I find that absolutely fascinating. And ultimately, I think if we were able to compare it to the male, would be very interesting, because I really think there would be massive differences there.
Yeah.
And also depending on, I think, where women live, because again, the unfortunately, we are not as lucky in different parts of the world. And I'm sure it massively impacts those psychological.
Completely. Yeah.
So there's so much more to unpick that is very freeing from all the cliches of like the female life stages. And yeah, I'm so excited to kind of explore how much more we can do with that.
To be honest, the way Alpha Diver delivered your insights was one, we didn't really know what to expect when we put this out there to you and a few other research partners saying, hey, this is what we're about. How can you contribute, and what do you think you will be contributing? And what you came back with was this very new and unique look at the values and the emotions that underpin female shoppers throughout these different life stages. And the fact they had nothing to do with the traditional like demographic breakdowns of, 18 to 35s or whatever it happens to be, was a surprise. And the way Alpha Diver underpinned that thinking proved it out. And I've had conversations with retailers about this report, kind of in a preview session, and they're all very, very interested in the insights because they realize right off the bat that women are a huge component of their buyership. They probably were less willing to admit that they didn't understand that buyer as well as they wanted to, but I think kind of all went, yeah, I could use a little help there. But when I started talking about the values-based, if that's the right word, way to kind of look at the way they operate, everybody started to go, oh yeah, that makes so much more sense. And how can I translate this thinking to my marketing people who are talking about channels and messaging and all this other stuff in a way that makes sense without kind of breaking their systems? And my response was, well, you probably have to break the systems because those things just need to be rethought anyways. The other thing that's worth talking about here is, as I've spoken of this report to various people, and this report, by the way, it's meant to be a high-level-ish overview of the overall understanding of how female shoppers work. But there's been a fair degree of interest in breaking this down further along vertical lines. Retailers have some very specific questions that I think we could answer in future editions. Automotive is a sector that's kind of popped up as a possibility. Hospitality and travel are kind of going, talk to us because we want to know this stuff. So I think there's a big future here. Picture your organization as a solitary island amidst a vast, churning sea of opportunities. On the horizon lie other islands, relationships waiting to be built, partnerships waiting to be formed. But between your island and those distant shores stretches a turbulent expanse filled with uncertainty and risk. You're going to need a bridge, or bridges, plural, to span this divide, connecting you to new horizons. Those bridges are strategic partnerships. Yet, building bridges and partnerships is no simple task. They both require careful planning, precise engineering, and a deep understanding of the terrain. Missteps can lead to collapse, leaving your business stranded on its island. Tectonic builds strategic partnerships, helping organizations navigate the treacherous waters, ensuring that those bridges are strong and resilient and scalable. There's a reason why some of the largest, most progressive companies in the world are retooling their revenue models and investing in partnerships. Find out more at tectonic.co. That's TECTONIQ.co. I'd love to just spend some time here talking about the actual findings in this report. And both of you are intimate with the data, so I'm just going to let you both do the talking here. But
Sure.
We've talked about the way the kind of values-based approach that we've looked at women shoppers. Let's discuss a little bit like what those cohorts really mean.
Mhm.
Because I think over time, as you said, Ingrid, they do sort of align with certain age groups, but they're just not the typical age groups.
Mhm.
So what are those values clusters, if that's, I'm
Sure.
making words up here.
Yeah. So yeah, I would modify that slightly. I mean, I think that's an interesting term to refer to as value-based. Now, we're really talking about it. We would typically describe it as, psychology-based. But when we think about these 4 psychological lenses, and these are all ways that we as humans have evolved to aid our decision making, the lens that you gravitate to as the one that works best for you to help you navigate the world. Yeah, because I could see you kind of continuing that out to say it does become indicative of, well, what do you value? What kind of information is useful to you in making decisions? What are you looking for? Like if and we should probably talk about what these 4 are very briefly. So, there's a very functional one, which is, very rational thought, somebody that does want to see comparative data and look at the numbers and feel knowledgeable and make an informed choice. But there's also an experiential lens that is really more about continually discovering new things, having new experiences, building a portfolio of experiences that you draw on, that helps you think about what something's going to be like and what kind of an experience you want to have, and really, much more of a sensorial way of navigating the world. There's a more conformity-based one, which maybe that sounds a bit like a dirty word, but it's the idea of like, you are valuing the input, the wisdom of your tribe. Like, what do people like me, and what have we agreed on is the thing to do? What is the thing to do that is going to keep the members of my group whose opinions I care about happy? And I want to make sure that I stay within the confines of that. That's a way of navigating decision making that comes to the fore for one of these groups. And then lastly, there's a very instinctual, impulsive one. It's just like, I'm going to follow my gut and go with what seems like the right thing to do, the thing that's going to feel good right now. So look, all 4 of these are in play, in some combination with all of these age groups that we're going to talk about. But we see, what we thought was really interesting is that we see at these different unique age breaks, there's one in particular where you see it really, they've really got that one in common more so than the other 3. And then it does change. So there's the first break that we found really was this youngest adult cohort, this 18 to 21-year-old women, who are really defined by the fact that no one of those 4 in particular has fully come to the fore for them yet. They're operating from a mix of the conformity, the impulsive, instinctual, the experiential. They're still figuring out, okay, what is going to work for me? What is the way I'm going to navigate the world? It's, they're still, they're confused. They're still making their way into adulthood, and, they're going to figure that out as they go. And one of these is really going to come to the fore for them. But right now, what characterizes them is they're much more the emotional ones than they are that very rational, functional, give me the data, let me make an informed choice. It's these other three that are meaningful. And we see that these three more emotional ones continue to be impactful through much of life. Then we move into the next cohort we found that really shared a common one was 22 to 37. So, when you think about traditional generation groupings, that's like older Gen Z and younger to like middle cohort of millennials. I mean, the oldest millennials are turning 44 this year. So, we're missing the top half of them. So when we do look at the generations in the more traditional breaks, we see that a lot too, that, younger millennials look a lot more like Gen Z, and older millennials either are very much their own distinct group or have more in common with some elements of like Gen X. I think Pew defines it anybody from 1980 to 1996 constitutes a millennial. That's a huge group. There's a lot of different formative experiences that, depending on which end of that spectrum you were born on. So it doesn't surprise me that we found it didn't totally line up cleanly. But so 22 to 37, this is a big cohort, is much more that impulsive instinctual drive, actually. And it makes sense when you think about it. You're building your career, you're making your way in the world, maybe you're building your family, you've got a lot going on, there's a lot of pressure, you're feeling ambitious, you're looking to move up. It's what can I do that helps me feel like I'm on top of things, like I'm making some quick wins, I'm making some moves. I look like I've got it together to my peer group, and all of that. This is a more diverse group. You're starting to earn some money. Maybe family and other people are coming into it. There's a lot going on with this cohort, and there's stress happening, and that going to that more instinctual. How do I get through this in the way that that gets me out on the other side the best comes to the fore for them in a really interesting way. And then we see another shift happen from 38 to about 49. So again, that older millennial cohort, and traditionally, and then part of Gen X, which is where that that experiential more. What can I discover? What new experiences can I have? Starts to come back into the fore. Like, okay, I'm kind of starting into maybe that act 2 of my life where I've got some of that other stuff figured out and under control. I can turn my attention a little bit back more to me and what I want to be doing. And, then they can have that opportunity to shift more into that more experiential, what do I want out of life? What do I do lens? Then we see there's another shift that happens from 50 to about 61.
Just anecdotally, when I was mentioning that particular shift, I happen to be talking to people who kind of fit into those age ranges, and you could visibly see the light bulbs going off over their heads as they kind of went, that's me, or that's my mom, or that's my described to a T. But you could see in their faces the absolute acknowledgement of these ideas. But I don't think, look, as marketers, we run hard and we run fast and we have a lot of stuff to get done. And I'm the first to admit that unless it impacts my goal for the day, for the moment, I'm not going to pay attention to it. So
but if you think about it from a marketer point of view, it's actually make a lot of sense, and it's super easy to implement. Like if we just think at a messaging level, or like highlighting thinking of me with like financial products, for example, like just you can in an instant see which product features you need to highlight and the hierarchy of messaging and features you highlight to actually respond to those different psychological frameworks. And it's it's a no-brainer when you just like think about it and you put that on paper. And then it's obviously a matter of test, iterate those messaging across like where are those people, what channels do they use? That's where it gets a little bit more like complex with all your campaigns and stuff. But the initial point of really matching your ideal customer profile with your product basically it's such a great tool. Yeah.
And again, this is that kind of how am I navigating daily life viewpoint, and context does matter. So, and that's one of the things that we're looking at when we engage with a client of in your context of interest. Is this different? And the degree, if it is different, the degree to which, okay, like to do that now, I've really got to switch from how I like to navigate the world to figure out this thing. Where there's tension there, that's another thing that's really important to uncover and look at. But you're absolutely right. Like understanding it at this broad level. I mean, the biggest overarching takeaway here is that it's not where none of these cohorts really is primarily driven by that functional, I'm going to sit down and make a spreadsheet and choose the most rational choice. Like everything that people, when they're consciously trying to describe their behavior, the way that they think and the way that they would try to describe, oh, this is what I would do. It's really actually these other lenses that are much more prominent for most of life. We're not as rational as we think we are. It's these more emotional lenses, the other values that are coming to the fore. And when you understand that and can activate against it, it can really change the kind, the ways that you want to talk to people, the kinds of information you want to give them, the kinds of, whether it's more about imagery and evoking, hey, this is what this is going to be like, versus here's a table comparing option A, B, and C to each other and what you get with each one. It's it's the way that you grab their attention and keep it and get your message across is very, very different when you understand what kind of a brain you're trying to reach.
I love the way you put that. When you understand what kind of a brain you're trying to reach, and I spend my life in this space, and I can tell you that there isn't a single bit of research I have ever seen that would indicate that most purchases are rational in nature.
Yes, and I don't have the full breakdown of when we looked at men, what did we see? But I would like to caveat that this is also going to be true for them. I'm not saying women are emotional and the men are the rational ones. I'm saying that we as people, that those are more emotional, the conformity, what are other people doing? The experience, that following my gut instinct, all of those are playing a role in describing behavior far more than that really rational, functional. And in fact, when we look at this at that gen pop level, and we've tracked this trend over time, predominantly what we've been seeing for the last few years is that impulsive, instinctual one is really the one that has been driving behavior at the total population level. It looks like it's starting, it's peaked, and maybe we're going to see that to come down, and a couple of these other ones might be starting to kind of ramp back up. But even there again, still, it's not the functional one. It's the experience and the conformity. Those are starting to slowly trend back up now at that gen pop level. So whoever you're trying to reach, it's not all about making these really functional, rational claims. There's a lot more to be gained from thinking about these other ways that people are making decisions.
Completely agree. And it's so eye-opening. Again, back to, just my anecdotal side conversations with people as I've been working on this project with you both, and describing what we think we've got here. The conversations almost immediately took a direction of, okay, how can I now use this unique set of insights to direct what I'm trying to pull off here? And Ingrid, you're a marketer. You're a marketer's marketer. I'd love to hear from you. You've spent a lot of time in this report, as I have. How do you actually make this actionable? What's the utility here in your world? Because you're now working in financial services, but maybe that'll lead into a broader conversation about how other marketers and other verticals can actually take advantage of this.
Yeah, and that's a very good point. And I think really it applies at many stages of a journey, and not only marketing, to be fair. I mean, if you think about products, that's at the very starting point of thinking of creating a product, you should actually have those things in mind. And I'm not talking woman here, I'm talking about those kind of 4 elements around the impulse, the experience, the conformity, and the function. Because basically, maybe you want to create a product that is fully into one of those areas, and then that would define your messaging and who you are talking to. So it's almost like at the start of that journey. Or you want something that actually is going to be a little bit more open, and then you have to think about the content of your product or how it is designed and how it applies to those different things. And now we have tools like gamification, for example, that can totally help almost like unpick any of these with different like triggers and mechanics, right? So that's from your product point of view. Then you have like what you would call your product marketing or your go-to-market. And that's what I was alluding to earlier, where you actually, based on that product you've created, you totally understand to which of these you need to actually apply your product to. And that helps you find your messaging, your ideal customer profile, and all of that stuff, and your audiences ultimately. And then you apply it at a more granular level to your marketing channels and campaigns, and potentially a lot of testing along those lines. And I guess what would be interesting is to sort of like almost like close the loop at the end of that and go back to your product and see if you were on the right path along the journey. But I would say that for me, it's almost a set of insights that you should have as a running thing alongside your product and marketing work and journey, and constantly like sense checking it and like doing the right research to see how it evolves and how you appeal to those 4 psychological traits, really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, completely agree. I'm thinking out loud as to how many marketers I know who are capable of that, probably all of them. But I don't know that anybody's really doing kind of like spot checks on their psychological accuracy, which is a really smart thing to do.
Yeah, and to be fair, I came across before this model, I did quite a bit of research before around psychographics. And psychographics are actually really hard to implement because you have so many dimensions, and also like really getting to the bottom of what is going to be those core values customers have, etc. There are so many different elements at play that, let's face it, we don't necessarily have access to or we don't know about, that although I love the theory, I have never really been able to apply it. Where this is, I would say, and apologize, Mary, if I'm not describing the way you would, but I think it's a much more simplified version of that has a lot more practicality and actionability for, I guess, probably achieving the same result. So, yeah.
Mary's not arguing with you. That's good.
There's a lot of power in the fact that it's, we talk a lot about like working model based instead of model free. Like this is the model. Excuse me. There's the 4, and there are subtypes and nuances to each of these, but broadly speaking, it's, there's the 4 drivers, and that covers it. Like we're not missing one. Like that's, you can find one of the 4 that's going to explain behavior in virtually any context, and it gives you a lot of freedom to. There's a lot of confidence that can come from really saying, yeah, we've covered everything, versus like more traditional segmentation to the psychographics. It's like, well, we got to get all of these different attitudinal statements, and hopefully when we look at the data later, it's going to come there. You're going to find these things that come together in group, like with like, and then it'll tell us who we got to go find. And there's a lot of simplicity in just like, well, we got to capture these 4 things, and that's going to get us most of what we need to know. And it tells us a lot about what we can do and how we can better activate, because we've at this core level understood how the brain is working. And that ultimately explains a lot of that other attitudinal and psychographic stuff that you measure, a little bit further down the line. So there's,
Yeah.
it's really, I find it to be a very powerful framework that.
And you can think of brands that are actually, maybe without necessarily knowing it, who are applying it and doing it, in my view. So yeah.
I wouldn't mind talking a little bit about some of the other themes that bubbled up in the research. I've got two in mind that I think are worth talking about, and we can go anywhere you'd like with these. But one theme would be ethical consumerism. In this podcast and in the things we publish on the customer, we've talked a lot about that, the pluses and minuses, the validity of the whole idea, what brands can do with it, transparency versus, greenwashing and all those kinds of things. But I wonder if we could just discuss a little bit your understandings of what that really means. What does ethical consumerism mean to the female shopping cohort? And Mary, if you want to take the first stab at that, or Ingrid, you're welcome to.
Well, I from our perspective, I think the important thing to keep in mind with concepts like ethical consumerism, et cetera, is there's going to be that say-do gap, whereas you go in traditional research and ask like, oh, do you buy? I only buy brands that fit with my values or that are sustainable, et cetera. And then you might see in actuality, then when you look at the scanner data, doesn't always translate. And I think some of that comes from, again, understanding what's the lens I'm looking at this through. Is it? And I think with things like that, there's a lot of that conformity lens going on. Like, well, there's kind of people like me buy organic. People like me should care about the value. And Gen Z as a cohort, I often hear being described as like, oh, well, they really care about these. That brands are like them and share their values and all that. There's sort of that social norming pressure to like, oh, this is the thing that we all supposed to care about. And that's what I'll say. And then, when it's just me at the checkout counter, maybe something else actually better defines my behavior. Maybe, I'm going more for that impulse, like, well,
I'm still buying the gummy bears,
but this one, that I know this one tastes good or something like, so that I would caution to keep that in mind. Like, what do you think, what is really driving why we consciously purport to value those things, and what do we really value, and how do you position in line with that? How do you make that message fit with what's really driving behavior in a way that closes that say-do gap?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I completely agree with that, and I think we probably don't see enough reports that are putting side by side the intention and the reality and the and there's a lot of different feelings that go into that. There's doing the right thing, there's the virtue signaling, there's then a bit of shame that comes to play, and all of those things mixed is I think it's a very, very difficult topic to unpick and to really know what's going on. And I think probably more than with many other categories or things, that's where you have probably the most discrepancy between the declared behavior and the actual behavior for all of good reasons, right? You're a Gen Z, you are actually very concerned about that, but do you have the money to actually make that happen? Or yes, and back to what we've seen, right? You're at that phase of your life where all you want is experiences, and then suddenly you're shamed if you fly. How do you make that happen? Mm-hmm. So all of that to say, I think it's a very important topic, but way more complex and difficult than the stats we can see here and there. The great thing is that we talk about it. And the more we talk about it, probably the better. But yeah.
I think, you know, maybe this is one of the great themes that we approach in a subsequent edition of the SheShops Report, because it's a it's a it's a topic that bubbled up. It showed itself to be important to female shoppers. But maybe there's a chance to look at this a little more deeply and look at some of the complexities. You're right, because, you know, the group psychology is at play in a big way in this, you know, when it comes to ethical consumerism and values-based purchasing. And that can be really treacherous waters to navigate. I mean, at least every month we see another large brand that stuck their foot in it because, you know, they just didn't have the sensitivities and sensibilities to navigate what they were doing well enough and ended up offending, or, you know, or creating a false offense, which is almost even worse, you know. So I'm going to suggest that along with the vertical approaches that we're talking about for the next editions, that we unpick this for our Europeans there a little more deeply, because it's clearly a thing. I mean, this comes across my desk thematically a lot, and it kind of comes in waves. But every time some brand steps in poop, it becomes a big thing. You know, are they greenwashing? Are they really serious? Do they really understand their customers, or was this like a tin ear effort where they just didn't get it? And you know, what's the blowback? And we could go through and name brands right now if we wanted to, but it happens, and it's important, and it sounds like we have the ability to really pull this apart in a way that could be meaningful for brands. So I'm gonna keep hammering that one.
And I think an element that could potentially be valuable to add to that is sustainable marketing.
Right.
The sustainable marketing is emerging, but probably I don't think it's a priority for the majority of marketers at the moment. So that, again, back to that, what we were just talking about from a consumer point of view, with a little bit of that kind of conflicting thing. You exactly have the same thing with your marketing, right? So that's probably another interesting thing to look into.
So the SheShops Report first edition is meant as an overview. As you've heard, there are plans afoot to create subsequent editions that are kind of more vertically oriented, and also pulling apart this idea of ethical consumerism and how that impacts brands, or rather say how the psychological underpinnings of how shoppers react to those brand activities. So lots and lots and lots to talk about here. But again, I want to thank Mary and the team at Alpha Diver for all of your contributions here. They're huge and really eye-opening and really actionable. And then a special thank you to my partner in crime here, Ingrid Sierra, for the incredible contributions you've made, not only to the customer, but to this report, and just kind of pulling off something that we think has real importance in the marketplace. So thank you to both.